than it is, and I would like to see the iron fist disappear. Unfortunately, it's the other way around. On the other hand, I think it cannot be maintained that laissez-faire is the answer. Either there's a necessary or a sufficient condition for development. Let me go to Milton's examples and refer to Japan. Japan is a prime example, actually, where the visible hand is invisible to everybody who's outside of Japan, but it's writ large on the wall for the Japanese. The Japanese government, right from the Meiji Restoration, has taken a very active interest in the development of the country. It has regulated technology imports. Even to this date, the government and business have a sort of strong symbiotic relationship. I think it's just the last.
Highly paternalistic.
And business is highly paternalistic. I don't think it's a valid example at all of what I believe was the implication of Milton's program.
Let's begin, Helen Hughes. On this theme, has the Third World made a disastrous mistake in almost unanimously moving into planned economies rather than the free market?
Well, first of all, it hasn't almost unanimously moved into planned economies.
Overwhelmingly so.
Not even overwhelmingly. I mean, India is a large country, but the majority of developing countries are not centrally planned. They have some sort of planning. Secondly, some of the countries which have been most successful have had the highest government intervention. The best examples are Taiwan, Korea, Brazil, Singapore. And even in Hong Kong, which is often held up as an example of no government intervention, I mean, this is just not true. The Hong Kong government has provided the infrastructure. It has provided the roads and the ports and the schools, and it's been very important. But when you move to a country like Malawi or Papua New Guinea, you can't do without government intervention. There is nothing there. There are no entrepreneurs in place, and the American entrepreneurs are not interested in small places like that.
I'm not in favor of no government intervention. I never have been. I point out in the film that what the government did in Hong Kong was very important. The question is what kind of intervention. And in the states you've described, in the places you've described where you've had success, governmental intervention has been of a rather special kind. It has provided infrastructure. It has not tried to determine the outline of industrial production, the areas in which industry should go, exactly what the allocation of. It has not gone in for central planning.
Well, that's just not true in Korea. I mean, you're factually wrong, because in Korea, the government
it is true in Taiwan.
It's fairly true in Taiwan, but not in Korea, which has grown faster than any other country, where Korean exports have been determined to a very large extent by direct government intervention. I think your point is, what sort of government intervention, what for, and what are the trade-offs between government intervention and the free market? These are the relevant issues.
What is the role of government in relation to the market economy? How do you see it performing, Don Rumsfeld? Do you want to see governments, as it were, enforcing competition by chasing down monopoly, restrictive practices, and all the rest in society?
The record's clear that they don't do it well. They can't manage the...
But does that mean they shouldn't do it at all?
Take the wage price controls in the United States of America. I happen to have been involved, and I don't say it with any great pride. The real world is, I don't care about good intentions. I don't care about brains. I don't care about integrity. The fact of the matter is they're not smart enough to manage the wages and prices of every American, 215 million strong. They can't do it well. They do it poorly. And the weight of that is harmful. It's graphically shown in every document issued by the Council of Economic Advisors in the United States.
But what about the additional question, though? Does the government properly, in this country or elsewhere, ensure competition by other devices? I'm not talking now about price control, wage control, but ensuring competition rather than permitting price fixing or agreements and monopoly. What do you feel about it?
I feel the government properly acts in that area. The government must be there to ensure competition.
The government's not smart enough. Look at the antitrust law. You talk about the implementation of antitrust regulations in the United States between the Department of Justice and the FTC. It's a patchwork mess. There isn't any logic to it. People don't know what to do. They can't get answers. They're inhibited from mergers and consolidations that would make a lot of sense from the standpoint of the consumer.
And would make even more sense from the point of multinational corporations.
I think that one of the points you're making is that it's very hard for the government to intervene in a very large country like India or the United States. But compare government intervention in some of the small homogeneous countries of Europe or a Singapore. And I think that's very important. Switzerland has a great deal of government intervention. Sweden, Denmark, Norway. I've just quoted you the 4 highest income countries in the world. They do have intervention to try and protect the functioning of the market system and to make it more efficient.
Milton is absolutely right that if you're talking about central planning, that has been disastrous, absolutely, in terms of having targeted industrial allocations and so on. I mean, there's absolutely no doubt in anybody's mind who has studied the problem over the last 20 years.
In India, too.
In India as well, very definitely.
You advised on that, didn't you?
No, not on centralized planning, no.
It wasn't a fair question anyway.
That's all right. I was over there as an advisor, too.
I've been on the side of the angels on that for a number of years, to a point where I'm supposed to be a friend of Milton's there, which is disastrous.
To give advice is one thing, to have it taken is a different one. I agree very much with what Helen Hughes has said, that the more homogeneous a country, the less harm a government will do by intervening. I don't believe it does positive good. I just simply believe it does less harm. But as to antitrust,
yeah.
I am in favor of the laws which make agreements in restraint of trade illegal. Most of the rest of the antitrust apparatus has promoted monopoly instead of hindered monopoly. If you look at where there are monopolistic elements in the world and in the United States, including the multinationals you want to refer to, in almost every case, that monopoly derives from a special grant by government. And therefore, the problem is not how does government enforce competition? How do you keep government from setting up monopolies? That's the real problem if you look at the real world and not at the preamble or the language of antitrust measures and similar laws.
How close are you to what Deason was saying a moment ago, though, in this area? He seemed to be arguing with you that there was a responsibility to make competition work.
The responsibility is to set up a framework of laws and of arrangements under which competition will flourish. And the most...
Inevitably flourish? I mean, or...
Well, so far as I know, I don't know of any case in history in which monopolies have been able to maintain themselves for very long without having government assistance directly come in on their side. The trade union monopolies that Mr. Deason represents would never have the kind of power they do now if it weren't for the special privileges which government has granted to them. I can perfectly well understand his being in favor of such action, of antitrust action by the government, because it really is pro-monopoly action in the main.
Why were those exemptions to monopoly laws given to unions?
Because of the political power of unions, of course. I'm not questioning that.
And because of the tremendous imbalance of power of companies at the time that unions were getting their start.
There's one concluding idea toward the end of your script that I'd like to look at because it seemed to me to be most provocative. You talked about the need for constitutional restraints on governments to prevent them interfering in foreign exchange, free markets, and in foreign trade. Now, what have you in mind, Milton, when you say constitutional restraints?
I have no doubt what I have in mind. If I could persuade the public, I would like it to adopt a constitutional amendment strictly parallel to the constitutional prohibition in the text of the Constitution against the central government, against state governments imposing tariffs or imposts. I would like to have a constitutional amendment which would read, the Congress shall not impose any taxes on imports or give any subsidies to exports except such as may be necessary. I think the wording of the Constitution is that the states are permitted to do it if it's necessary for inspection. That's the excuse under which California inspects you every time you drive past to see whether you're carrying any plants or fruits or vegetables.
Milton, let me ask you a question. How long do you think that the United States would survive if the United States enacted what you would like to have?
I think the United States would prosper in a way that is hardly imaginable today. It would be an example and a beacon to the rest of the world. What kind of sense does it make? Here we are supposedly the leaders of the world. We are the ones who promote freedom and free enterprise and individual initiative. And what do? We force puny little Hong Kong to impose limits, restrictions on its exports at tariffs in order to protect our textile workers. We go to Japan and we say to Japan, for God's sakes, you got to limit the number of television sets you come out. Instead of doing that, we ought to be setting an example to the world.